As dream jobs go, Premier League footballer has to be up there. You get to do something you love for a living, you get fame and renown, and you get a whole lot of money. But what happens when that dream turns sour? What happens when you get some bad advice and you're left with not only nothing, but owing millions of pounds to the tax man? This is what happened to the V11. 11 footballers from the early days of the Premier League who found themselves retired, bankrupt, and staring down the barrel of a massive tax bill. For the V11, what happened was simple. They were young men with no financial experience and huge amounts of income, and they were taken advantage of. They claimed they were financially abused by the hawks and hangers-on looking to make a fast buck from naive football players. But for their asset managers and financial advisors, it's a different story. They claim their advice was offered in good faith. They say it wasn't their financial services that brought the whole thing crashing down, but shifts in government policy, global economic downturns, and tax rule changes that no one could have predicted. The story of the V11 starts positively, with boyhood dreams come true and football history made in real time. But when it goes bad, it goes really bad. We're talking spiralling debt, crippling addiction, and mental health in tatters. August 1992 was a new dawn. The old First Division was done, the new Premier League was here, and players like Brian Deane were flying high. Deane was 24 years old, and he'd cemented his place as a stalwart at Sheffield United. Leading the attack, he'd risen through the divisions with the Blades, and now he was here at the birth of the Premier League, a new era for English football. This was an era in which the dark days of 80s hooliganism could be forgotten, and the glossy sheen of Sky Sports would see the money rolling in. And so, at 3 p.m. on August 15th, 1992, Sheffield United welcomed Manchester United to Bramhall Lane. The Premier League dream was well underway. At 3:05 p.m, Deane scored. It was the first goal of the Premier League age. Deane had immortalised himself in pub quiz trivia history forever. 33 years on, those heady days seem like a distant memory for Deane, though. Financial management has pushed the former striker to the brink. He's kept up his cheerful facade, but every day is a struggle. You have to go out every day, he says. You smile, get dressed, put on your veneer, and you say everything's fantastic. Another player who was flying high in the early days of the Premier League was Michael Thomas. Back in 1989, he'd scored the goal that handed Arsenal the league title over Liverpool. 3 years later, now with Liverpool, he'd scored in the FA Cup final for his new employers. Life was good. He was looking forward to becoming one of Liverpool's key men in their new chapter. But in 2025, Thomas told the BBC how his life fell apart. "I live like a clown," he said. "All fun on the outside, laughing and joking, but every day I think about a lot of things. It's tough, even just to speak out." So, what happened here? How have these young men, with the world at their feet, fallen on such hard times? For solicitor Ben Rees, the root of the problem was cash flow. For these young men, it was like somebody had given them a money tap and turned it on full blast. Suddenly, these young kids who haven't had much money, from families who haven't had much money, are awash with it. And we really are talking about a lot of money. The average wage for a Premier League player in that first season was around £1,500 a week, or around £77,000 a year. This might not seem like much compared to the mega wages of these days, but when you consider that the average UK salary was about £13,000 at the time, it's not at all bad. Some young players decided to live in the moment, enjoying the high living that their earnings provided, but others had one eye on the future. They understood that their careers were sure. By 35 they would be retired and figuring out what to do with the rest of their lives. If they invested their money properly, at least the financial side of things would be taken care of. Then an opportunity, an asset management firm by the name of Kingsbridge. For players like Brian Deane, this was perfect. Kingsbridge offered what everybody wanted, Deane said, to have someone looking after your finances for when you finish playing. What's more, it seemed like Kingsbridge were a safe bet for young players. They claimed to be managing the assets of more than 360 footballers. Many of these players recommended the company to their teammates in the dressing room. In fact, the Nottingham-based Kingsbridge claimed to be from footballing stock themselves. The company was run by Kevin McManaman and David McKee, and McKee said he himself was a former footballer, having played with Ross County in Scotland. This, he claimed, gave him insight into the football world. He knew what the players wanted, and he knew what they needed. It also gave Kingsbridge some credibility. Leading figures like Leeds United manager Howard Wilkinson seemed to endorse the firm, and Kingsbridge even landed a listing on the League Managers Association website. In the words of investigative journalist Richard Belfield, Kingsbridge inserted themselves into the space between the players, the agent and the club. They said, "We have the financial expertise to manage your money." One such player was Rod Wallace. He'd been signed by Howard Wilkinson at Leeds United in the summer of 1991. His £1.6 million fee was a big deal in those days and raised a few eyebrows, but it quickly paid off for Leeds. Wallace was instrumental in their league victory the following season. He went on to a solid career. He stayed at Leeds for 7 years before heading north of the border to Glasgow Rangers in 1998, where he won another 5 trophies. All the while, he was still loving playing football and letting Kingsbridge take care of the financial side of things. But what were Kingsbridge actually doing with Wallace's money? You see, Kingsbridge's strategy was built around something completely unconnected with football. These were the tax reliefs introduced by the new Labour government in 1997. Under the new rules, investors could deduct any money they invested in a British film industry project from their own tax up to £15 million. Kingsbridge sold this as a great opportunity for their clients. They leveraged their clients' investments to take out loans and maximise potential returns. They then invest this into a tax-deductible film scheme, often a film scheme that they earned a commission from, sometimes up to £70,000 at a time. The profits from the film scheme would then be invested into a separate investment vehicle, often an overseas property scheme. Again, Kingsbridge would get a commission for this too, but as long as the money was rolling in, no one worried about that. The idea was that this second round of investment would keep on paying dividends and essentially grow the investment forever. And as it was property that they were dealing in, it didn't set any alarm bells ringing. It was a good old-fashioned investment in bricks and mortar. From Rod Wallace's point of view, everything seemed rosy. After a successful spell at Rangers, he spent a season back in the Premier League with the Bolton Wanderers before his career began to wind down. He ended his career at Gillingham in 2004 and began looking forward to the comfortable retirement he'd secured from shrewd moves made years earlier. But fast forward to 2009 and it was clear that something was very wrong. His investments had essentially been wiped out, leaving him with next to nothing. And as if this wasn't bad enough, he then began receiving threatening letters from HMRC. In Wallace's own words, "My worth at the time of my retirement was around 1.9 million. After the film schemes, gone. Instead, I'm landed with a £1.6 million tax bill. I'll be bankrupt. Homeless." So, what happened? Well, for solicitors and journalists looking into the case, one of the glaring issues was the nature of the investments themselves. One such investment was Charlotte Harbour in Florida, which was advertised as a luxurious development like those seen on the Florida Keys, but was allegedly nothing of the sort. The development has been beset by legal and financial problems from the very beginning. Those investigating the case believe it was never a viable investment. This explains the wiped out investments, but where's the tax bill come from? And this comes from changes in tax law. In 2007, 10 years after the film investment scheme, Labour decided to hold a review. They found that the scheme was being abused as a way to avoid tax without actually benefiting the film industry. And so they pulled the plug. But not only that, they decided to call in the tax that had been avoided. This was a controversial decision and left many investors owing huge amounts to HMRC. This perfect storm of financial catastrophe left people like Rod Wallace footing the bill. But Wallace was far from alone. Another player in the same boat was Craig Short, a tough centre-back. Short made his name at Notts County and Derby before moving to Premier League with Everton. When his playing career came to an end in 2009, Short should have been looking forward to a future of financial security and comfortable living. But instead, he was hit with a £1.6 million tax liability. For these people to come into my life and be my friends and take my money and take my future, they shouldn't get away with it, Craig Short said. This idea of friends is important. Rather than just providing asset management and financial advisory services, it seems McKee and McNeminen really got close to the players that they worked with. Tommy Johnson also started out at Notts and Derby and went on to a strong career in the English and Scottish Premier Leagues. He remembers the two Kingsbridge heads celebrating with him when he won the League Cup with Aston Villa in 1996. Not many people get to hold the League Cup in their hands, do they? Johnson said. Bastards. That just shows how close they got to us. McKee and McNeminen were ever present in Johnson's life. They celebrated his footballing achievements and even his personal milestones. The two financial advisors were guests at Johnson's wedding. But it was another one of their clients' marriages that could spell trouble for Kingsbridge. When Craig Short married Carly Barnes, he not only found a life partner, but also a tireless advocate for his cause. Carly Barnes Short practices as a solicitor and lawyer. When she found out what her husband was facing, she immediately believed something was up. She decided to investigate. This kicked off another round of word of mouth. Players like Brian Deane heard about what Carly was doing, then Rod Wallace and Michael Thomas, as well as Danny Murphy, Tommy Johnson, Sean Davis, Andy Cole, and others joined the action. These players became the V11, 11 players who represented the rights of all victims of Kingsbridge's mismanagement. Mismanagement that former Liverpool and Fulham player Danny Murphy has called financial abuse. The V in V11 stands for victors. We have team captains, Premier League title holders, Champions League winners, FA Cup winners, Carly said. This is a group of extraordinarily successful players. Some of the losses incurred by these players is staggering too. Carly and her team believe the average is around £1 million, but many players lost far more. Danny Murphy, for example, believes he lost between £4 and £5 million. You think you're invincible when you're playing, and everything's done for you. Everything's given to you on a plate, Murphy said in 2025, but there are loads of pitfalls out there. However, while this is understandably devastating for the players involved, there's a big question at the heart of this case. Does any of this really constitute a crime? The City of London Police actually investigated McKee and McNeminen back in 2018 after the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, raised the issue. McKee and McNeminen were in fact arrested during their investigation, but were released without charge. In 2020, the investigation was closed. Representatives of the V11 say they were told that they were victims of crime, but the police statement said that there was, quote, insufficient evidence to support a realistic prospect of conviction. McKee and McNeminen continue to deny any wrongdoing. They've maintained that they offered advice in good faith, and the backtracking from HMRC and the UK government unfairly landed investors with high tax liabilities. As the pair said in a statement, despite the early government support, HMRC began to take a very aggressive stance. The credit crunch hugely depressed property markets, and so loans were called in. They've also stated that many of the accusations are simply not true. For instance, McKee and McNeminen say that Craig Short was never advised to invest in either the film schemes or the property schemes. Investing is, of course, always risky, and many people have lost large amounts of money due to schemes that seemed good at the time, but then went sour. Though the youngsters at the beginning of their Premier League careers may not have been fully across the technicalities of large-scale investment, they surely understood that profits are never guaranteed. McKee and McNeminen have stood by this argument, and as of October 2025, the case is still ongoing and no wrongdoing has been proven. However, solicitors and journalists believe that the V11 have a good chance of success. Solicitor Ben Rees believes that the advisors made too many mistakes, too often, and at too high a cost to be allowed off the hook. I think every professional advisor makes mistakes, Rees said, but the volume of and the consistency of these complex, high-risk, unregulated investments were just totally unsuitable for young, naive, kind of financially inexperienced footballers. McKee and McNeminen don't agree. They said their advice was fair and transparent. In their statement to the BBC, they said, film schemes attracted huge support from all areas of the financial services industry. Any losses suffered by clients are deeply regrettable, but were as a consequence of changes in HMRC policy and the worldwide property market collapse in 2008. They also stressed that they served a huge number of clients, most of whom ended up happy. The statement continues, Kingsbridge had well over 2,000 clients, many of whom received very similar advice. The huge majority of these clients remained satisfied with the way that Kingsbridge handled their affairs. But this is of no consolation to Craig Short, who invested in Charlotte Harbour. The first property had no value whatsoever, Short said. I had a huge mortgage on it, which I just couldn't afford. The easy thing for me to do was walk away, give the keys back. In fact, Rees believes that this wasn't just bad advice. He thinks McKee and McNamara had a vested interest in this investment. Quote, "When you start seeing the investments where the advisory firm themselves have got an interest in the projects or they're involved somehow, that's not a mistake," Rees said. Regardless, though, of who was to blame for the investments gone wrong, the psychological toll has been immense. Sean Davis, who enjoyed 12 straight seasons in the Premier League with Fulham, Spurs, Portsmouth and Bolton, has spoken of the heavy toll the experience has taken on his personal life. The strain of the situation led to a total communication breakdown in his marriage. While Davis and his wife have remained on good terms, they have since broken up, and this sent Davis into a spiral of depression. "You can feel fine, kind of forget about it, then wake up the next day and literally want to myself," he said. "That's how I feel." Davis now works as a painter and decorator, but his income isn't going to be enough to pay off that £330,000 tax bill if HMRC does decide to enforce it. The strain of the situation has led him to alcoholism. "The sad thing is, I'm at my happiest when I've had a drink," Davis says, "because you kind of forget about it." Danny Murphy recognises that spiral of substance abuse and mental health breakdown well. "During the dark days, which lasted 12 months, I indulged in drink, drugs and gambling. My marriage broke down, I fell out with my brothers and friends and became really isolated." Murphy also believes that many other ex-players have felt suicidal. Craig Shaw has also struggled with his mental health as the inescapable sense of impending financial doom hangs over him. He remembered how he was served a bankruptcy petition on Christmas Eve and how bailiffs pursued him to the Oxford United training ground where he was about to hold a coaching session. "I fluctuate from deep bouts of depression, sadness and anger," he said. "HMRC will probably enforce, and I have nothing to give them." As it stands now, the HMRC still plans to collect that money that's due. Their statement reads, "We have a duty to collect tax when it is legally due. We recognise that dealing with an inquiry and a large tax liability can be stressful, and we are absolutely committed to identifying and supporting customers who need extra help." The outcome of the case is going to hinge on whether Carly Shaw-Barnes and her team can prove any wrongdoing. If the V11 and the hundreds of others they represent are the victims of financial abuse, the liability may lie elsewhere. If not, if they're found to have entered into the investment schemes with eyes open and lost, then the bill will be due, and this is going to be crippling for most. Today, Premier League players earn far more than they did when the V11 were playing, and we're living in an age where 9 clubs can have a net spend of above £100 million in a single transfer window, and Manchester City spend more than £230 million a year on squad wages. The amount of money in football is now truly terrifying, and large sums of it are concentrated in young, naive players who can easily become targets. Without robust protection for young players suddenly awash with funds that they don't know what to do with, financial abuse is not only going to continue, it's going to get a lot worse.